To kick off his fight against the King of Curses, Kusakabe, as a master of the new shadow style, dropped down and activated his simple domain. Evening Moon, Sword Drawing. Sukuna tilted his head at the sight of the man using a sword drawing technique against someone who can easily send flying slash attacks. Kusakabe narrowed his gaze. Because it's an anti-domain and anti-barrier technique, Kusakabe's simple domain can at least negate the sure hit effect. Although it's simple, a domain is still a domain. Sukuna moved his hand to attack. Kusakabe placed his hand on his sword. He knew that within the simple domain, his curse energy output would be increased, while Sukuna's abilities would be slightly weaker. Although a slightly weaker Sukuna would still be too strong for the whole cast. But there was one more benefit that was even better than all of that. He quickly dealt with the life-threatening attacks. Kusakabe can apply his own programming to the simple domain. This lets him automatically intercept anything that enters his domain. Sukuna was unbothered but slightly interested by the Grade 1 Sorcerer's solid reaction time. Kusakabe was focusing really hard. By doing so, he could pretty much read Sukuna's slashes based on his movements or curse energy sparks. But just when he thought that, one of the attacks was just barely dealt with. An overbridge behind him was torn apart instead. Kusakabe was terrified by the sudden attempt. Sukuna actually managed to activate his technique without making any movements. And if that's the case, Kusakabe noticing it at all is super impressive. The King of Curses started playing with his food and told the man to guess what would come next. Kusakabe anticipated the world-splitting dismantle. In the past, when she was camping with her little brother, Mei admitted that when it comes to raw strength, she or Nanami were probably above Kusakabe. While stepping out of a car, Nanami said that he couldn't exactly see Kusakabe winning fights. Instead, it was more like he had a hard time picturing him losing. The man is a master of the sword. He has no shortage of technique variations, and he can use barrier techniques. His thorough knowledge of Jujutsu is the foundation of his greatest strength, analytical ability, and reasoning. Mei enjoyed a drink from her bare mug while calling Kusakabe a human Swiss Army knife. To her, he was the sort of sorcerer you'd want to have with you on a deserted island. While buying some ice cream, Gojo spoke of how Kusakabe has a secret weapon in the form of his simple domain. For beginners, that sort of thing usually requires a binding vow or something like that. Miwa, for example, can only maintain hers if both of her feet remain planted on the ground during activation. Gojo took a picture of his frozen treat for the gram. Unlike Miwa, Kusakabe can use his without restriction. The range was also pretty crazy. Then we got a shot of Gojo eating. What Kusakabe did next came as a surprise to the King of Curses. Looking down, he recognized that the Grade 1 had increased the range of his simple domain. This way, Sukuna would not be able to charge up his curse energy. Mei explained that fundamentally, sword draw is a counter technique that's used to draw in an opponent. Kusakabe, however, can bring his opponent to him by increasing its range. There was also the fact that he could automatically intercept any invaders. As someone who was able to reach Grade 1 without an innate technique by using their spine rather than their brain, Kusakabe was not someone to be underestimated. There was a sudden rush of debris. Kusakabe unleashed a seemingly endless stream of rapid-fire attacks. This barrage resulted in several cuts all over Sukuna's body. Adjusting his glasses, Nanami mentioned how he didn't know anyone who'd be able to evade Kusakabe's attacks. However, someone like Gojo wouldn't really need to. In the midst of this flurry, Kusakabe's katana broke. Sukuna's eyes remained calm. Meanwhile, something appeared near Kusakabe's. He quickly removed his overcoat. He then tossed it over Sukuna's head and resorted to using his fists. Sukuna cut the coat in half to remove it from his head. Then Kusakabe delivered a kick that Sukuna blocked with his elbow. But the force was still enough to send Sukuna crashing through one of the many highway routes. Kusakabe rushed after him to maintain the proximity. Sukuna began smiling as their hand-to-hand battle proceeded. Kusakabe was giving this fight his all, which was pretty unlike him. He wondered why that was. The answer came to mind pretty quickly in the form of Principal Yaga. He still owed the guy for what he had done for his family. But at the same time, Principal Yaga is dead. But it's for that very reason that Kusakabe is not running away. Yaga isn't around to say anything on his own, but Kusakabe could only imagine what the guy would say if he was. His old friend wasn't the type to chastise him for saving his own skin. He also couldn't see the man keeping him from seeing his sister or nephew either. But he imagined that Principal Yaga would look a bit sad. Not because of an unwillingness to sacrifice himself, but because they wouldn't be able to fight side by side. The commentary about Kusakabe continued. They all shared the same big reason for placing the man so highly. Although he never misses an opportunity to complain, his intelligence was unmistakable. Ultimately, they all recognized him to be a kind person. Kusakabe removed his suit jacket while acrobatically evading several attacks. This was hardly the time for him to be in his own head second-guessing. If he's defeated, it wouldn't be long before Sukuna slaughters Miwa and the other players. Kusakabe dropped down to a low stance as split rubble fell behind him. He thought of all the young sorcerers who fought so desperately with their lives hanging in the balance. Kusakabe applied cursed energy to his broken blade. He resolved to do the same as an adult. With new shadow style, Moonlight Veil, he extended his blade with his own power and charged right at Sukuna. The King of Curses smiled when he recognized that the sorcerer was targeting his damaged heart. Holding the sword between two fingers, he mentioned how his opponent couldn't be any more obvious. And just like that, Kusakabe knew that his time had come. Things were quiet for a little while, but laid out on the ground with cuts across his torso was Kusakabe. Sukuna seems to enjoy having the endings of his fights be off-screen. And even though he got washed in a single chapter, I can definitely say that I'm a Kusakabe fan. He really did his thing. It's a shame it had to be against the strongest character in the series, because this would have been really hype against a more reasonable opponent. Wee, whose name is still so awkward for me to say, appeared and called out to the injured sorcerer. In the next second, Sukuna was looming over the boy, calling him an annoying pest. Wee turned in shock. Sukuna carved into the spot where he previously was, but there was no body. Looking up, the king encountered a new face, and probably a new color, all things considered. Sukuna's next opponent figured that the guy must not get out much if he doesn't know who he is. Miguel has arrived. Described as the man who went toe-to-toe with Gojo, he successfully managed to say wee and told Sukuna that the Japanese really need to expand their horizons. Now, toe-to-toe with Gojo is a wild exaggeration. I distinctly remember Gojo executing a wild combo on this man, although you could argue that that wasn't actually in the manga. Although, come on bro, does anyone actually expect him to be our savior? I would love to know what the hell Miguel is supposed to do here. Also, I'm genuinely curious if anyone is excited about this. Is there anyone following this story who is just like, Sukuna's going through all these opponents, I need to see Miguel here, Miguel needs to show up? Narratively, I don't really get this whole enemy of the week thing for Sukuna. We started out with Sukuna versus Gojo, which despite going on for quite a while, was very exciting and cool. And from there, it's hard to beat that. And don't get me wrong, we've had cool moments with Yuta, Yuji, and Maki, but it feels like we're in an endless loop here. It's like watching a fighting game champion go against a computer on easy mode again and again. We're so far down the list that we've gotten to Miguel. Even if it's copium, I want to believe that Gege has a plan here, so if any of you guys see any sort of bigger picture at play, please let me know. As always, I'm Slice of Otaku, thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.